The gentle, rhythmic click-clack of my keyboard was my sanctuary, the sound of worlds taking shape in the quiet solitude of my office. This room, a small sunroom I had claimed as my own, was my escape. Lines with bookshelves that bowed under the weight of research and inspiration. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the swirling dust motes and the organized chaos of my desk. Stacks of note cards, a trio of half-empty coffee mugs, and the quiet, loyal hum of my laptop. This was where I wasn't just Helen, David's wife. This was where I built foundations. For my husband, David, the sound from this room was nothing more than the irritating, metallic tick of a clock counting down the money he felt I was wasting on a fruitless dream. His arrival home was never subtle. It was announced by the heavy thud of his expensive briefcase hitting the hardwood floor, a sound of wary importance, followed by the jangle of his keys being tossed into the ceramic bowl on the hall table. He loosened his silk tie as he appeared in the doorway of my office, his presence immediately shrinking the space. His gaze, sharp and appraising, swept over my desk not with curiosity, but with a familiar, weary judgment. He didn't see the architecture of a best-selling book. He saw a mess that needed tidying. "Still playing at being the next great American novelist, I see," he said. His voice was a carefully calibrated instrument, honed to deliver insults wrapped in a thin veneer of affectionate teasing. It was a line he'd used 100 times, perhaps 1,000, and each time it landed like a tiny sharp stone against the fragile shield of my concentration. I forced a smile, a placid mask I had perfected over years of practice, and swiveled in my chair to face him. "Just working, David. It was a productive day. How was yours?" He shrugged, leaning his broad shoulder against the doorframe, a posture of casual ownership over me, the house, and the very air I breathed. "The usual grind. Closed the Henderson deal. Mr. Grant was impressed, of course. Said my projections were impeccable. Another fat commission check in the pipeline, which is good, since someone has to pay for the country club membership." He always spoke of his boss, the billionaire industrialist Theodore Grant, with a breathless reverence that bordered on worship. In David's world, a person's worth was a number on a balance sheet, and Mr. Grant was a god of finance. "That's wonderful, honey," I said, my voice deliberately even. "I know how hard you worked on that." Showing any reaction to his barbs, I'd learned, was like adding kindling to a fire. Neutrality was my only defense. He gestured vaguely at my screen with his chin. "While I hope that little project of yours starts contributing to the bottom line sometime this century, all that screen time and late-night lamp burning," he let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh that held no humor, only condescension. I didn't tell him that the initial advance for my current project could have paid our mortgage for a year. I didn't tell him that my client, Theodore Grant himself, was so pleased with my work that he'd already promised a bonus upon completion that would dwarf David's fat commission check. I couldn't. The non-disclosure agreement I had signed was ironclad, my anonymity absolute. To the world, and most importantly to my client, I was a ghost. A highly paid, sought-after ghost, but a ghost nonetheless. To my husband, I was just Helen, the woman with the expensive, time-consuming hobby that produced nothing but noise and clutter. "I enjoy it," I said simply, turning back to my screen and hitting save. It was the only defense I ever offered. I knew the truth was a weapon, one I kept holstered and hidden away, hoping I would never have to use it. I just never imagined David would be the one to force my hand. 2 weeks later, David came home in a state of near euphoric excitement that was almost alarming. He was practically vibrating with self-importance, waving a thick, cream-colored embossed invitation in his hand like a royal decree. It was for the biennial Baker family reunion, his mother's side of the family. A sprawling, loud, 3-day ordeal held at a rented lakeside pavilion an hour out of the city. It was an event I usually dreaded, a marathon of enduring passive-aggressive comments from his mother, Lorraine, and sidestepping invasive questions from his cousins about when I was going to give up my scribbling and get a real job. But this year, David had a surprise that he believed would change everything. "Guess who's coming to the reunion?" he beamed, his chest puffed out so far I thought a button might pop on his custom-tailored shirt. "The star of the show!" I continued chopping vegetables for a salad, not looking up. "I have no idea, David." "The governor," I deadpanned, my voice flat. My lack of enthusiasm only seemed to fuel his excitement. "Better," he crowed, slapping the invitation down on the marble countertop next to my cutting board. "Theodore Grant. The Theodore Grant. I invited him as my personal guest of honor, and he said yes. Can you believe it? He said he admired my family values and wanted to come see where I came from." My hand froze, the knife hovering over a cucumber. The clatter of it dropping to the cutting board seemed to echo in the suddenly silent kitchen. A cold dread washed over me, a sensation like stepping into an icy lake, shocking and absolute. Theodore Grant, my client. The man whose entire life story, whose most intimate thoughts and defining principles were currently housed on my laptop's hard drive. The man with whom I had weekly confidential video calls discussing the nuances of his childhood poverty and his ruthless corporate takeovers. He was coming to a place where my two separate lives, the public fiction and the private truth, were set on a catastrophic collision course. "David, are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "It's a family thing. It's informal. He's such a private man. He might feel incredibly awkward." David just scoffed, his good mood impenetrable. "Awkward, Helen, don't be ridiculous. This is the ultimate power move. My boss, a billionaire legend, coming to my family reunion? Lorraine is going to lose her mind. My cousin Gary, with his stupid little startup, will finally have to shut up. This solidifies my position at the company for years to come. This is my shot at the vice president chair." He saw it only as a strategic victory for himself, another jewel in his corporate crown. He was completely blind to the danger, to the person at the very center of it all, me. "Just be careful, David," I pleaded, trying one last time. "You know how he is in the book. He values discretion above all else." He waved a dismissive hand, already imagining his triumph. "Oh, I know how to handle him. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Just make sure you look presentable and try not to talk his ear off about your little writing hobby, okay? We don't want to bore him with amateur stuff." He patted my head, a gesture of patronizing affection one would give a child or a pet, before striding out of the room to call his mother. I was left standing in the kitchen, the salad forgotten, my heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against my ribs. The bomb was now armed and ticking, and my husband had just lit the fuse. The morning of the reunion dawned bright and oppressively cheerful, the kind of perfect summer day that felt like a mockery of my internal turmoil. The sunlight that streamed into our bedroom felt like a spotlight, exposing the fine lines of anxiety that had etched themselves around my eyes after a sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through 1,000 disastrous scenarios. David, on the other hand, had slept like a king and was now whistling a jaunty, off-key tune in the shower, the sound grating on my raw nerves. I sat at my vanity, applying a careful mask of makeup, trying to project an image of calm, wifely serenity that I was nowhere near feeling. Each stroke of the mascara wand was a deliberate act of building my armor for the day. I chose my outfit with tactical precision, a simple but elegant navy blue sundress. It was understated, professional, and screamed, "I am not trying to draw any attention to myself," which was precisely the goal. It was a uniform of invisibility. When David emerged from the bathroom, a fluffy white towel wrapped around his waist, he surveyed my choice with a critical eye, a slight frown creasing his brow. "Is that what you're wearing?" he asked, his tone laced with disappointment. "It's a bit bland, isn't it? Like a librarian on her day off. I was hoping for something more eye-catching. You know, that red dress. You're the wife of Theodore Grant's right-hand man, after all. You need to look the part." I met his gaze in the mirror, my own reflection looking back at me, calm and unreadable. "I think the red dress is a bit much for a family barbecue, David. This is appropriate." He sighed, the long-suffering sound of a man burdened by a wife who just didn't get it. Fine, your funeral. Just try to be charming at least, and for God's sakes," he added, turning back from his closet and pointing a finger at me for emphasis, "if Mr. Grant asks what you do, just say you're a homemaker or that you volunteer. It sounds better than aspiring writer. That just sounds desperate, unsuccessful." The insult, so casual, so deeply ingrained in his perception of me, barely registered as a fresh wound. It was simply a confirmation of the deep foundational crack in our marriage. Instead of pain, a strange, cold resolve began to solidify in my chest, like ice forming on a still pond. For years, I had absorbed his condescension, telling myself it was a small price to pay for domestic peace, for the freedom to pursue my passion in the quiet hours when he was at work or asleep. But today felt different. The stakes were higher, and my patience had worn terrifyingly thin. As we drove towards the lake, David chattered endlessly about his plans to impress Grant, mapping out conversations about market trends and angling for the perfect moment to casually mention his interest in the open vice president position. I sat in the passenger seat, a silent partner in my own life, watching the green scenery blur past the window. I thought about the manuscript for The Grant Foundation, saved and encrypted on my laptop back home. I thought about the final chapter I'd just completed, where Theodore Grant wrote with brutal, unsentimental honesty about loyalty, respect, and the quiet contributors who truly build an empire versus the loud sycophants who merely inhabit it. It was a chapter I had poured my own soul into, drawing from the deep well of my own quiet experiences. I had written the words, but I was beginning to realize I was about to live them. My secret had always felt like a shield to protect me from David's judgment. Now, I wondered if it wasn't also a sword. And David, whistling beside me, was walking directly towards its point. The Baker family reunion was in full chaotic swing by the time we arrived. The air at the rented lakeside pavilion was thick with the competing smells of grilled hot dogs, sweet barbecue sauce, and the sharp chemical tang of citronella candles. This symphony of scents was punctuated by the high-pitched shrieks of over-sugared children chasing each other near the water's edge and the booming, back-slapping laughter of David's uncles. His mother, Lorraine, a woman with a perfectly coiffed helmet of silver hair and a gaze that could curdle milk at 20 paces, descended upon us the moment we stepped out of the car. "David, darling," she gushed, clutching his arm and kissing his cheek while her eyes performed a swift, critical appraisal of me. "Everyone is so thrilled you're here. We were just talking about your latest promotion." Her eyes flickered over my navy dress, a flicker of disapproval in their depths. "Helen, that's a sensible choice." I smiled politely, the expression feeling stiff on my face. "It's good to see you too, Lorraine." David was immediately swallowed by a sea of relatives, all eager to hear about his life in the fast lane. I was left on the periphery, an ornamental satellite to his glowing sun, a familiar and profoundly lonely position. I found a quiet spot near a large, gnarled oak tree, nursing a cup of lukewarm iced tea and feeling utterly invisible. It was in these moments that I truly understood my role in David's life. I was a prop, meant to be supportive and silent, validating his success simply by existing quietly in his shadow. About an hour into the festivities, a sleek black sedan, a stark and elegant contrast to the minivans and pickup trucks filling the gravel lot, purred to a stop near the pavilion. A hush fell over the nearby conversations. A uniformed driver opened the rear door and out stepped Theodore Grant. He was exactly as he appeared on our video calls. Tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in casual but obviously expensive linen pants and a crisp white shirt. He moved with an air of quiet, unhurried authority that commanded more attention than any loud entrance ever could. David, spotting him, practically sprinted across the lawn, his face alight with a sycophantic grin. "Mr. Grant, Theodore, so glad you could make it," he exclaimed, pumping his hand with an enthusiasm that bordered on frantic. "Welcome to the Baker clan." Mr. Grant smiled, a polite but reserved expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you for the invitation, David. It's a lovely setting." His eyes, a piercing and intelligent blue, scanned the crowd, taking in the scene with the practiced ease of a man who misses nothing. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, they met mine. There was no flicker of surprise, no confusion. There was only a brief, almost imperceptible nod of professional acknowledgement, a silent message that passed between us. It was a look that said, "I see you. I know who you are. We are colleagues." David, busy preening and introducing Grant to his bewildered and awestruck mother, missed it entirely. To him, I was just a part of the background scenery, a fixture as unremarkable as the red and white checkered tablecloths. Mr. Grant was gracious, shaking hands and making small talk, but I could see him observing, analyzing. He was a man who had built an empire by reading people, by understanding the subtleties of human dynamics that lay beneath the surface of conversation. And as he watched David boast and posture, and as he saw me standing alone under the tree, I knew he wasn't just seeing a boss and his subordinate with his quiet wife. He was seeing the entire, unwritten story. The tension in the air became a palpable thing, a live wire running from him to me, completely invisible to the man who thought he was in control of the entire day. The afternoon wore on under the hot July sun, and with every passing hour and every beer he consumed, David's confidence swelled to insufferable proportions. He was the undisputed king of the reunion, a local boy who had made good and brought home a titan of industry to prove it. He held court by the barbecue pit, telling exaggerated stories of his corporate triumphs, always making sure Mr. Grant was within earshot, laughing just a little too loudly at his own jokes. I watched from a distance as my husband casually and repeatedly cast me in the role of the punchline. "You should see the study," he told his cousin Gary, loud enough for half the party to hear. "Looks like a library exploded after a hurricane. I can't even find the desk under all of Helen's materials, notes and books and God knows what else. But hey," he concluded with a magnanimous shrug, "it keeps her busy." The small circle of relatives chuckled dutifully, their laughter a painful echo of my own diminishment. I felt a familiar sting of humiliation, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, waiting calm. I was no longer an actor in this sad domestic drama. I was an audience member, waiting for the final act to begin. I saw Mr. Grant observing these exchanges. He never reacted overtly, his face a placid mask of polite interest. But I, who had spent months studying his every nuance to capture his voice, could read the subtle signs. I saw the slight tightening of his jaw when David dismissed me, the way his smile became a fraction more rigid when Lorraine gushed about her brilliant son and his very supportive wife. At one point, he broke away from the crowd and walked over to my quiet spot under the oak tree, a bottle of water in his hand. "Mrs. Baker," he said, his voice low and respectful, a stark contrast to the boisterous tones around us.
I hope you're having a pleasant day." Before I could answer, David, seeing his boss talking to me, hurried over, a nervous energy about him. He immediately inserted himself between us, putting a heavy, possessive arm around my shoulder. "Just enjoying the show, Mr. Grant?" I replied, my gaze steady on his. "Don't mind Helen, sir," David said with a strained laugh. "She's the quiet, artsy type, more of an observer." Mr. Grant's eyes held mine for a second longer, a universe of understanding passing in that glance. "There is great power in quiet observation," he said, his words clearly meant for me alone. "It's where the most compelling truths are often found. It's the foundation of any good story." He then allowed David to lead him away to meet another uncle, leaving me with the echo of his words. He knew. He saw everything. He understood the dynamic completely. And with that single sentence, he had validated my entire existence in a way my own husband never had. The sense of foreboding that had plagued me all morning was transforming, hardening, into a strange sense of anticipation. The impending collision no longer felt like a disaster. It felt like a reckoning. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows across the lawn, David grabbed a microphone from the small DJ stand his uncle had set up. "Attention, everyone! Can I have your attention, please?" He slurred slightly, his voice booming over the speakers with newfound power. "I'd like to propose a toast." A hush fell over the party. I stood frozen, my plastic cup of iced tea clenched in my hand. This was it. The moment had arrived.
David stood in the center of the pavilion, a makeshift stage, basking in the glow of 100 pairs of eyes. The setting sun cast him in a golden, almost beatific light, a stark and ironic contrast to the ugliness that was about to spill from his lips. He was drunk on alcohol, yes, but he was far more intoxicated by his own perceived importance. He had his audience. He had his billionaire boss watching from a place of honor. This was his coronation. "First," he began, his voice amplified and slightly distorted by the cheap speaker system, his words echoing across the now silent lawn, "I want to thank you all for coming. Family is the most important thing, the foundation of everything." He paused for a smattering of applause and appreciative murmurs from the older aunts. He then turned to his boss, dipping his head in a gesture of deep reverence. "And a special, heartfelt thank you to my mentor and a true titan of American industry, Mr. Theodore Grant, for gracing our humble gathering with his presence today. It's a true honor, sir." Mr. Grant, seated at a picnic table, gave a gracious, non-committal nod, his face impassive. David's eyes then scanned the crowd, a predator seeking its prey, and they landed on me. A smug, self-satisfied grin spread across his face. He was about to deliver the punchline he'd been crafting all day. I braced myself, my posture rigid, my expression a carefully constructed mask of neutrality. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. "And finally," he said, raising his plastic cup of beer high, the foam sloshing over the side, "I want to toast my loving wife, Helen." A few of the older relatives cooed, "Aww," a Pavlovian response to the word wife. But David wasn't finished. This wasn't a toast of love. It was a performance of ridicule. "She's a woman of many passions," he continued, drawing out the word with a mocking lilt that dripped with condescension. "She keeps herself very, very busy with her little projects, her little stories. And as a good, supportive husband, I'm always happy to foot the bill for her creative endeavors." I could see the confusion on some faces, the dawny, sycophantic smirks on others, like his mother's. He let the silence hang for a beat, savoring the moment before delivering the final, devastating line. "So let's raise a glass to my wife, Helen, the most expensive hobby I've ever had." A wave of awkward, scattered laughter rippled through the crowd. It wasn't the roaring approval he'd expected. It was hesitant, uncomfortable,
the sound of people unsure if they should be complicit in such casual cruelty. My face burned with the humiliation so profound it felt like a physical blow. I saw my entire marriage laid bare in that one foul sentence. My dreams diminish to a little project, my worth measured only in the dollars he spent, my identity reduced to a costly, amusing pastime. I didn't cry. I didn't look away. I simply stared back at my husband, my silent gaze a mirror reflecting his own ugliness, letting him see the absolute, irrevocable end in my eyes. The murmuring started to die down, the awkwardness congealing into a thick, heavy silence. And then a new sound cut through the air, sharp and decisive, the scrape of a wooden bench on the concrete floor. A clear, calm voice unintentionally amplified by the still live microphone David had forgotten to turn off. "May I say a few words?" Every head in the pavilion turned. Theodore Grant was on his feet, and David's smug, triumphant grin had instantly vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. The world seemed to hold its breath, caught in the sudden, sharp shift in atmosphere. Theodore Grant stood tall, his expression unreadable, a mask of calm, corporate steel that I recognized from his most intense negotiations. David, still holding the microphone like a forgotten toy, looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train, his face rapidly draining of all color, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed visage. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sounds, broken only by the distant lapping of the lake against the shore. "David," Mr. Grant began, his voice resonating with the quiet, unassailable authority that needed no amplification. That was quite a toast. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly weighted stone. "You call your wife a hobby, an expensive one." He took a few deliberate steps forward, his gaze sweeping over the silent, staring faces of the Baker clan, before settling back on David with piercing intensity. "It's interesting you should mention cost, because I am a man who understands value. I've built my entire life on distinguishing a fleeting expense from a priceless asset, and I feel it's my duty, as your guest here, to correct a serious and, frankly, embarrassing misinformation." He turned his body slightly to address me directly for a moment, a gesture of respect, though his words were a bombshell meant for everyone. "For the past 8 months, I have been working very closely with one of the most brilliant, disciplined, and talented writers I have ever had the pleasure of employing." David's eyes darted between me and Grant, a frantic, confused panic dawning on his face as he began to connect the horrifying dots. This writer took my life's story, my thoughts, my memories, my principles, and forged them into a narrative so compelling, so powerful, that it has been on the New York Times bestseller list for the last 12 weeks. I am, of course, referring to my memoir, The Grant Foundation. A collective, audible gasp went through the crowd. He wasn't finished. He looked directly at David, his voice turning to ice, each word a hammer blow. The anonymous ghostwriter of that book, the hobbyist you just publicly mocked, the woman whose little projects you so generously foot the bill for, is your wife, Helen. The silence that followed was deafening. It was a silence filled with the sound of David's world, his reputation, and his ego shattering into a million irreparable pieces. I saw Lorraine's perfectly painted mouth hang open in a caricature of shock. "That expensive hobby," Mr. Grant continued, his voice relentless and surgical, "came with a signing bonus that could have bought the car you drive 3 times over. Her royalty checks, which she has earned through pure talent and a work ethic you would do well to emulate, now surpass your annual salary. Your wife isn't your most expensive hobby, David. For my company, she has been the single most profitable creative investment I've made all year. She is not a drain on your resources. She is the reason my personal brand is stronger than ever. She is not an aspiring writer. She is a consummate professional at the very top of her field. He let that final, devastating statement land in the dead air. David swayed on his feet, his face a ghastly shade of pale. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror, disbelief, and a dawning, sickening understanding. In that moment, he didn't just see his wife, he saw his own monumental, public, and irreversible foolishness.
The party was over. Not officially. People still stood around awkwardly, holding warm drinks, but the festive energy had evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating cloud of communal shock and shame. Small, silent clusters of family members whispered, casting furtive glances at David, who seemed to have physically shrunk into himself. He was no longer the proud host, the king of the clan. He was a pariah at his own family gathering, the butt of a joke far crueler and more permanent than the one he had tried to tell. His mother, Lorraine, for the first time in the many years I had known her, seemed to be at a complete loss for words, her face a frozen mask of fury and abject humiliation. David finally stumbled towards me, his bravado gone, stripped away to reveal the desperate, pathetic man underneath. "Helen," he whispered, his voice cracking, raw with a pain born not of remorse, but of exposure. I didn't know. Why didn't you tell me? I would have." I looked at him, and to my surprise, I felt no anger, no hatred. All that remained was a profound and weary pity for the small man who could only measure worth in dollars and public acclaim. "Would it have mattered, David?" I asked, my voice calm and steady, a clear, clean note in the messy aftermath. "Would you have truly respected my work, or would you have just seen me as another asset to be leveraged for your own ambition, something else to boast about?" He had no answer. He just stared, his mouth opening and closing silently. He knew, and I knew, the devastating truth. The secret wasn't the problem. His contempt was. Mr. Grant approached us, his presence a protective and formidable shield. He gave David a final, withering look of disappointment before turning to me, his expression softening. "Helen," he said gently, but with an unmistakable tone of command, "my driver is waiting. I think it's time for you to go." He didn't phrase it as a question. It was a statement of fact, an offered escape hatch from the smoldering wreckage of my old life. I nodded, a single decisive gesture. A wave of immense, cleansing relief washed over me. I turned to look at David one last time. He looked small, broken, and utterly alone. A man undone by his own arrogance in front of everyone he had tried so hard to impress. There was nothing left to say. There hadn't been for a very long time. I walked away without a word, following Mr. Grant towards the gleaming black sedan that waited like a chariot. I didn't look back at the stunned faces of the Baker family, or at the husband who had never truly seen me for who I was. As the car door closed behind me with a solid, satisfying thud, shutting out the sounds of the disastrous reunion, I felt a decade of weight lift from my shoulders. The car pulled smoothly onto the road, leaving the pavilion and my past behind in the rearview mirror. I looked out the window at the darkening sky, at the first stars beginning to appear bright and clear. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a writer. I was a success. And for the first time in a very long time, I was free. My hobby hadn't been expensive. It had been priceless. It had bought me my life back.